Oakley doke, let's rock and roll. Calling this meeting to order of the Komitea Putea Maki Hoki Finance and Performance Committee. As you can see, I'm not Desley Simpson. The chairperson is away for the meeting. And I haven't done this in 2.5 years since I was local board chair. So I know you're going to be very kind and nice to me throughout the day. Thank you. Exactly. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. So we have a number of councillors online, which is great. Great to see you guys there. The process that I'm going to run today is I'll take questions from the room first, and then we'll go to the chat bar online. So if you can go on the chat bar. So that's simply because I don't have access to it, so we're sort of going to work around it that way. So cool. Right, without further ado, we're going to request a roll call. Okay, Sandra.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Simpson is an apology. Mayor Goff.
Present.
Councillor Cashmore.
Kia ora.
Councillor Bartley.
Kia ora.
IMSB member Blair is an apology. Councillor Casey.
Morena, Sandra.
Morena. Councillor Collins.
Kia ora, Sandra. Kia ora, Chair.
Councillor Combe.
Kei koneo.
Councillor Cooper.
Kia ora.
Councillor Dalton.
Morena, Sandra.
Morena. Councillor Darby.
Morena.
Councillor Filipina.
Kia ora.
Councillor Fletcher.
Morena.
Councillor Hills. Councillor Mulholland.
Good morning, everyone. Present.
Councillor Newman.
Good morning, Sandra.
Morning. Councillor Sayers.
Good morning, Sandra. Thank you.
Councillor Stewart.
Good morning.
Councillor Walker and Watson will be slightly late. IMSB Chair Taipari.
Hatamari.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
Kia ora, 大家早.
Thank you. And if we can just check, Councillor Hills, have you joined yet? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sandra. Now, moving on to apologies, and I've received apology for absence from IMSB member Blair and Chair Simpson. Apologies for lateness from Councillors Walker and Watson, and early departure from Councillor Fletcher. Do we have any more? Yeah.
No.
Councillor Stewart.
Sorry.
So I'll go Councillor Stewart first and then online.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Walker and Watson have been involved, well, they haven't been involved in the car accident, but there has been a car accident over the shore. They're almost here, and I know that they are here to listen to the public submissions and the local board submissions. So if we could delay things for a little bit, even if we had to adjourn for a short time, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to keep going until we get to the public input part, and then we might adjourn for 10 minutes with the indulgence of the meeting. Yeah, 'cause I understand that. That's okay. Cool. Okay, so I'm moving. Yes, thank you, Sandra. I am moving that. Can I have a... Oh, we had another one online, did we? Sorry, I heard some voices online. I'll just double check. Do we have any other apologies? Okay, cool. I'll move that. Oh, no, yeah.
Apologies, that was me. Sorry, Chair. I saw it online where it had the declarations, but obviously it wasn't at that time, but it was actually on the monitor.
Yeah, we'll get to there in just a tick. So I'll move. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Young. All those in favour, please say aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Moving on to declaration of interest, there is a declaration from item 10, Business Improvement District Policy, Councillor Mulholland. Can I just get you to confirm that one verbally, Councillor Mulholland?
Thanks. Yes, I have put it in the chat bar and I'm happy to declare my interest. So I will shut down my system for that, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks. Appreciate that. Moving on to item 3, which is confirmation of minutes, and I'll move those as well. Could I have a seconder? Councillor Dalton, thank you very much. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Aye. Thank you. We have no petitions. We're moving on to item 5, public input, but I have a request to delay the proceedings for 10 minutes and call for an adjournment. Look, I'm actually okay with that. These things kind of happen. If there's no objection to the meeting, I think we should just go and have a little bit of a cup of tea, if that's all right. Cool, fantastic. We will rejoin at 10:17. We'll give it a good 10 minutes, eh? Cool, okay, thank you. Ding, ding, ding. Right, let's rock and roll again. So we're up to item 5, which is public input. I have one deferred request, and that was the Extinction Rebellion Tamaki Makaurau Auckland. And the reason for that deferral is it's discussing council budgetary stuff that's more appropriate for the incoming council. And they have presented, as you know, to the Climate Change Committee recently. So they'll be back after the election, basically. So moving on to our accepted requests, and we have 3 of those. So just to let you guys know, we've got 5 minutes for each public forum item, and then questions after you've done with your presentation. So Sandra has a bell. I think you'll ding it once at 4, eh? How about that? That's cool, perfect. So first and foremost, 5.1, Frank Lombard. Kia ora, yeah, come up to the table, thank you.
So just want to check it's the right button to move the presentation along. Okay, thank you, councillors, for the opportunity to come and present here. So there's a couple of us from the Sunny Hills community, and we just want to present on the community feeling on the park is proposed to be sold. So just a very quick one. 60 years ago, Lou and Irish Fisher subdivided the land, and as part of their resource consent, they had to cede a certain amount of public space to the community. So the question I've got is, if the council proposing to sell this reserve, is the council not breaching the resource consent of our subdivision? Because nowhere have I seen that the resource consent has been altered for our subdivision. So that's one point. There was overwhelming community feedback against it. There was, after 1,145 submissions to the council, and a majority of those actually named 9 40-foot lane as a reserve. We had over 700 submissions purely from that we've collected from our community that we've submitted to the council. So not one person submitted to say, please, can we sell it? The other point that was brought out in front of the independent commissioners, the hearing, that the policy they've used to assess the criteria for sale is actually an acquisition criteria. The council has not got a policy that's to look at it to be dispose of assets. And the council officers at the hearing actually did admit that most of the pocket parks created 50, 60 years ago would not be created under the current policy these days. So it's wonderful kind of during the whole proposal, so not one council officer actually visited the local community to look at what the impact would be on the local community. So they made a statement to say, as part of it, the current area is not scheduled for any development or highly intensification. But if I look at where the park is, around the area, there's been in the last 4 or 5 years, 80 houses have been removed and 24 new builds has been completed. There's 8 construction zones right at the moment, and there's 31 units or houses under construction on that. And there's another 3 where the resource consent has been once been applied for, 10 units to be built, and 2 others where right next to the park, where it's been applied for 12 units to be going in. So if we look at it, business officers in the local area, all the sections I've marked in yellow there is where development has happened. As you can see, it's highly concentrated around 40-foot lane park, because a lot of developers are targeting the big sections there and the open space. 40-foot lane is a very narrow little cul-de-sac. As you can see, the top left-hand side, it's pretty much if cars are parked on the road already. It's a one-way in, one-way out. As you can see, the bottom photo, that's happening on a regular basis weekly. If there's any cars parked in the turning circle, council services can't turn around, use the council service to pick up bins. That rubbish truck nearly came all the way to my retaining wall to pick up the bins that was parked in there. So the cul-de-sac can't take any more houses. And then with the intensification that's happening in the area, the pocket parks becomes a lot more valuable for the community. As can be seen by the council's principal urban designer, George Weeks, said, plentiful, accessible public spaces are essential for this and simply not a nice to have, but greenery is good for us. And the same with Alex Tang, the Chief Sustainability Officer from the council, said, green spaces will help the city become a low carbon region. So pocket park serves the local community very well. It's a safe park, it's 90% fenced. Locals from all around the community can bring their dogs there, they play with the dogs. Some afternoons there's 5, 6 dogs running around chasing balls. There's no major roads around. It's safe for kids to play. The alternative park that the council proposed was on the boulevard, which has got a slope towards the boulevard road, which is a busy road. There's no footpath next to it, so if kids are running after a ball, the next moment they'll be straight into the road. And that just shows that the council officers proposed for it to be sold did not visit the local community to see what's the needs of the local community. And then another point is just the mixed messaging we're getting from the council. During the last 18 months, the council has declared an emergency, climate emergency. We're looking at, but at the same time, we're selling green space. So it's mixed messaging for the community. And so the last point I just want to sort of say is, please say no to self reserves. And we actually want to ask the councillors who's making the decision is to think about what legacy you want to live or leave behind for Auckland Council. For now, for 10 years, for your children, their grandchildren, in 30 years' time. Because once, with all this intensification of housing happening, is the parks becomes more valuable to the local communities. It's places where the communities can connect with the neighbours. And once a reserve has been sold, it's gone forever. We will not get new reserves in existing built-up areas. Yes, we will get new parks in new neighbourhoods or sections being developed, but there's no new ones coming through. So thank you for the time.
Thank you, Frank. Do we have any clarification questions from the committee? Councillor Coombe, yes.
Tēnā koe e te hia mana. Kia ora, thank you for coming along and presenting. It's good to see the passion that the community has for this green space. Do you think there would be interest in the community getting together and buying it?
But buying it depends on the cost, kind of, or how much. The community will definitely be interested in maintaining it. The independent commissioners did recommend that the council look at it. Is it a way that the council retains ownership but take the cost of maintaining it away? The community will definitely, through a community local board or local, because we will be paying for it to maintain it and probably enhance it some more. But the question comes down if you want to sell it to the community, what's the cost going to be, kind of thing. They'll definitely look at contributing to the upkeep of the park. I'm not sure if you'll get people with the house prices, where houses prices at the moment is for, depending on how much they want to pay, because there's going to be capital to it. Thank you. Hope that answers the question.
Ngā mihi, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Sure. You'll be aware of the housing legislation that the government is promoting, 3 houses, 3 stories everywhere, and the intensification of the zoning in this particular location. Are you familiar with any work that council officers have done to project out the intensification in the area and then relate that to the additional reserves that might be required in this area?
No, not that I'm aware of. Like I said, as far as I'm aware of, all council officers has done was look at flat plans on a computer. Nobody's visited the local community. I did put in an official information request back in January to request from the council if they can tell me how many resource consents has been issued in the local Sunny Hills area in the last 5 years. And I was advised that no, the systems are not set up, they cannot run that to tell me. So there's...
Sure. So it would be fair to say that in a situation where the council has to provide reserve space, because we've got a ratio of reserve space to dwellings and population, if the council were to sell this particular property, is there any other undeveloped property in the area that council could buy in the future at any comparable price?
No, I don't think so. We know that it's all built up. The council will be competing with other developers. Developers is purely out of financial gain. If we look at the numbers, like I said before, it was 3 years ago, it was 8 houses, went to 24. There's now 8's gone to 31. There's 3 consents in there for
sure.
31 houses. There's more and more. Developers will pay more, and
Understood.
the density rules make it easier for them to buy up.
And just further to my question around any study by the officers, has there been any calculation that you've seen by council officers projecting out the additional development in the area allocating against that development the contribution that council will receive for reserves, some of which will be spent in the area for neighbourhood reserves and pocket parks. Have you seen anything to that extent?
No, I've
Okay,
not.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Do we have any more questions? Nothing online? Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Frank. Thanks for presenting. Now, we're going to do public input one by one in terms of moving and seconding today. So I will ask Councillor Stewart and Councillor Young to move and second. Is that all right? Awesome. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Fantastic. You may note I'm fairly liberal with my questioning, but I'll ask councillors not to use it as a time for debate because we have time for that later as well. 5.2, Steve and Louise Stickland. Kia ora.
Kia ora. My name is Louise and this is my husband Steve. So Morena, Talofa, Maloi, Lele, good morning. My husband Steve and I will play tag team. I'm going first, followed by a video, then Steve will close off. I want to talk to you about leading with moral purpose. As a senior education advisor to schools, principals and boards of trustees, I'm in leadership, as you are councillors also. Moral purpose is defined as a value that appeals to the innate sense held by people in leadership of what is right and what is worthwhile. The Ministry of Education is putting millions of dollars right now into supporting schools to assist more and more children with mental and social well-being issues. This is not just in low decile schools. Proven research studies have shown significant relationships between urban green spaces and human, i.e. physical, psychological, mental, social well-being. The review found that even a single view of a greenery from a window increases work performance and prevents adverse health effects from stressful life events. So green spaces provide a peaceful platform to be relaxed for human, physiological and mental well-being. The natural environment works as mediation and accelerates the restoration of stressful life effects. Yesterday, as you all know, we started term 3. Most schools at the moment have little more than 50% return of their students. We have students sitting in homes who have anxiety. They are not wanting to return to the classroom. This is because of 2 years of social issues, where families have been in crisis. COVID has exacerbated this. The interaction with green spaces of students daily or even once a week is necessary for positive mental growth. The role of you as policymakers has become more critical than ever for sustainable and balanced urbanisation now and into the future. I leave you with this government mantra: children are at the heart of the matter.
Can you play the video, please?
Reading on a tree. What are you doing? He's already tired out, isn't he? Oh, you'll have to run down to get him now.
They're my grandchildren. I've got 6 of them, not quite all of them there. And the first thing they want to do, notice they're in their school uniforms, is come and play on that reserve. Straight after school. So on your email signature, on the email signature of every council representative, I see this statement, championing inclusive democracy and the public voice for diverse communities of Tamaki Makaurau. If this is your mission statement, some of you are failing to listen. And it's now time to lift your game. Children and young people are a silent part of our diverse community. I've shown you videos of my grandchildren running and climbing a tree and playing with a miniature poodle on 40-foot Lane Park. I believe open spaces for children and grandchildren are what it's all about. Open green spaces are essential for the development of healthy minds and the physical well-being of children, our youth, and in fact, all of us. This reserve is also a meeting place for our community. Isn't that what it's all about? Protecting our green space is more important than ever, and it needs to be a renewed priority of the council. The government has changed the rules on you. Please support the motion from Councillor Stewart to revoke the resolution relating to 9 40-foot lane. Every one of you needs to support this.
Thank you, Steve and Louise. Thank you very much for that. I'll put it through to clarification questions, and I have one so far. Councillor Newman online.
Yeah, look, thank you, Steve and Louise. When I was a kid, I would play cricket on a park like that until it got dark. If your grandkids could get away with playing at that particular park until what hour of the day, how long would they be out there on a general school day after school?
Well, I pick them up on two times a week, and often they just want to run out there. And you can play cricket on that park. You can kick a ball around because it's quite flat. And you can. One of the things that's noticeable is you can't do it on the reserve around the esplanade. It's all too narrow. It's all beautiful, but it's too narrow to kick a ball and play cricket.
Our grandchildren would easily be out there for a couple of hours. We now have a little puppy, and they just adore being able to let off steam. I'm coming from with my hat on as a senior advisor for the Ministry of Education, and we've got huge problems with our children and their ability to engage in their learning. And so at the moment, there's a strategy that we're going into schools with, which is attendance and engagement. And these children need to be able to let off steam and throw balls and do what children can do or should be doing, so they can then engage in their learning and be balanced, healthy individuals.
And my follow-up question, a lot of schools in my ward, I don't know about this particular area, of course, now, they have open space, but they also have big fences around those schools to protect that property. I'm assuming that, notwithstanding the fact that the socioeconomic profile might be different, that there'll be schools in that area that are also chucking up fences to basically lock those particular grounds and those play areas out after school. Would that be fair?
Exactly, and that's what I'm also involved in, the cost of abuse of school grounds after school. So, yeah.
The way this park is actually set up is that it's in the middle of of an area which is actually got surrounded by quite busy roads. So children can actually walk safely and play on this park unsupervised. And the kids in the street walk down there and they bring their dogs and they run around. And we don't need to supervise the kids. They can go out there. It's at the end of a cul-de-sac. It's completely safe, remarkably safe.
Thank you, and thanks, Councillor. Councillor Watson, then Councillor Walker. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Louise, I just want to pick up on some of your comments about mental wellbeing, and I'm looking at a report here from the Regional Public Health, a summary of the impact of open spaces on health and wellbeing as it goes to young people, and basically just quoting a whole series of international research documents that show the benefit for all people, but particularly for young people. And in respect of those young people, the important factor that they identify here is proximity, so proximity to open space. In your educational experience, I wonder if you could comment on the other thing that's happening with open space at schools, other than schools being fenced off. So in my ward, you just can't get into schools. Is it increasingly the open space within the school itself is being taken up? So I went to a new school, Otia Valley, it's less than 10 years old, and already half their one sports field is taken up with a 4-storey building. So within the school environment, not only is it locked outside, but that open space. So they have to program different breaks for half the school because it's so congested within that school environment.
Yes. So we've got a lot of rezoning going on at the moment because there is preparation for looking forward to 30 years. Principles, so building is going to be on the agenda. There's just, a full-on, what would you call it? Sorry, I'm nervous. There is a future planning happening so that schools in Auckland can cope with the influx or the concentration of people that are going to be moving into the Auckland zone. And so it is actually quite frightening seeing how big some of these schools are going to get, and the building will happen on those spaces that are at the moment green. And they will be, so students they hanker for being able to find, if you watch students at lunchtime, where do they go? Where do they go? And they move out into isolated places under trees and around the fence lines of the green spaces in schools. That's where they go.
An earlier question from Councillor Coombe was about could the community buy the reserve? We already bloody well own it through you guys. Why would we want to buy it? I mean, that's what your job is, to own reserve, not for us to be buying it off you. That's offensive, actually. Crazy. We already own it. And we paid for it years ago in the subdivision. It's offensive.
Councillor Walker.
I have visited the reserve and walked on it, and I have a number of questions that go to the needs of children. So, is it fair to say that the reserve is looked over by neighbouring properties and the consequences that enhances its safety? I'll just go through the questions and you can pick up on them. Is it also true that the reserve has trees that are suitable for climbing, such as that cryptomeria that you had?
That's on the reserve.
And the reserve is drained. In point of fact, it has a slight slope, so that actually is quite conducive to drainage and all year round use. And I'd just like you to reconfirm that it's an incredibly easy reserve for young people to get to safely, walking and cycling. Are all of those things the case, and is there anything that you would add to that?
Well, the reserve has two access ways onto, what's the other street called?
Treeway.
Treeway. So there's an access way from Treeway, and there's an access way from 40 foot per lane. So the access is exceptionally good, and for a majority of the kids in that area, or people in that area, they don't have to cross any roads, and the roads are actually quite busy.
So just picking up on that, what we're talking about selling is a reserve that is in place, that was part of the subdivision design, has access ways that would be irreplaceable for any other reserve, because council would have to purchase multiple properties in order to accommodate that. And in point of fact, is it true that council would have to buy multiple properties at a considerable space, and I don't know how many, to substitute for this reserve? Would that be the case?
It would absolutely be the case.
Absolutely. Children, Sunny Hills Primary School is at the back of that reserve, and they walk through the reserve, particularly in summer, obviously, to get to and from school. So it is definitely a well-used space. In fact, instead of selling the reserve, what councillors should be doing is putting a playground on it, which would be amazing.
So just revisiting my question, and I'm familiar with the reserve, would it be the case that the council, in order to replace a reserve like this, would have to buy between 4 and 6 properties to deal with the present amenity that this reserve provides in respect of the reserve space itself and the relationship to the community and access through safe access ways?
I don't think it would be possible to buy them, because the sections are about 750 square metres each, and this is about 2,500 square metres. So how many sections are going to be? It would be impossible to get everyone together to do it. It's just impossible. It's there. We don't need to be having a conversation about buying other stuff. Why don't we just protect what we've got?
So if it's 2.5...
What was the first question that you asked?
It was really about the number of properties that you'd have to buy. By my calculation, it looks like it might be about 8 properties that council would have to buy, or more, to substitute. At what cost?
Makes no sense to sell something and then try and replace it.
Thank you.
And it's in a prime location as well from the point of view of access, and the kids are playing on it now. I don't know whether you guys, you need to go down there and actually have a look. It is a bit of a bog at the moment, because it needs a bit of draining to make it so that it's pristine in the winter. But the kids still run around on it. The first thing I want to do is go and climb that tree.
Okay, Councillor Dalton.
Thank you. I just, excuse me, a couple of questions for Mrs. Stickland. You raised the work that you've been doing around, you're in conversations around accessibility to school grounds after hours, I think, and also conversations around the increasing school population and the lack of open spaces. My first question is council involved and at the table regarding the conversations of increasing school roles and the need for open space? Is council there in those discussions? Because I would think that would be quite critical. If there's a perception might be the wrong word, but that council is missing, are they there?
I'm sorry, I'm struggling to hear what your question actually is. Are councillors actually having the conversations around the table?
And the conversations that you're having around open spaces and the growth of school population with education, is Auckland Council, not councillors, council, involved in those discussions in the context of getting informed on the growth of school populations and the lack of open space?
My understanding is no.
I wonder if there's an opportunity there in the conversations you're having to recommend that Auckland Council do be at the table.
I would agree, and it's the same as Kaingaora and what is happening with intensification and the impact on children with the type of building that has been done, where we've got multiple families moving into these complexes that are being built right now, and the social issues that are coming out of this sort of building and this sort of accommodation is actually now moving into the classroom, and it is the teacher and the principals that are dealing with children who are absolutely, they're damaged psychologically because of what they're seeing in this concentrated building. They're also transient families because they have to move around as they can find the accommodation with kāinga ora. So we actually, I want to come back to what I started with as moral purpose, and as leaders, we need to make the right decision.
Thank you. Also grandmother of 6 children and from the south, which is experiencing significant issues, just like you've explained, perhaps a bit more transient. My second question for you, in the discussions that you've had about opening school grounds to community, it's something I'm really interested in. Where is that partnership between local and central government? And if it's not your question to answer, that's fine. And to giving access, and this isn't so much about, you've talked about mental health of our children. This is probably more about the organised sports because of the assets that our taxpayers' money have funded. So the accessibility to what we have paid for ourselves, all of us, to our young people outside of school hours, is that part of the conversations that you're having in those discussions around accessibility to school grounds?
This is my personal opinion and not the opinion of the Ministry of Education. But there seems to be a disconnect with what is happening where decision makers down in Wellington make decisions for Tamaki Makaurau.
That's a very consistent and accurate answer.
And
thank you.
That is my personal opinion.
My last question is just with regard to Naina 40-foot lane, what is the reach of community around the area that is using that particular reserve?
This would go probably, I would say, 40-foot lane. It would go the boulevard. It would then go back into Treeway.
Fisher Parade.
And Fisher Parade.
The other thing is that access across Treeway is that's got traffic islands in it to slow the traffic. So we're talking about safety of the little older children, you know, like my granddaughter's, the oldest granddaughter's 10, so 10-year-olds and above could go to that reserve from some of the other streets. I certainly would be unhappy with them crossing the boulevard or crossing Fisher Parade, but it's very, very central. And the thing is that, you know, your next speaker, Leon, he looks over that. He and his wife, so anything untoward would happen, he would be onto it straight away. And Frank also looks onto it as well.
It's got a lovely openness about it. It's not something that you would suspect that people would lurk in who might have ill intentions.
Yeah. The other thing, at the end of 40-foot lane, between the reserve and where we live, there's a driveway. Behind that, there are 2 sections that the developer owns. One of them is about 1,500 square metres. There's a total of about 2,500 square metres. And they're just starting to bore holes in the ground to do a development on that. Lord knows how many houses will be on that, but that is going to happen immediately behind us. And so there could be 10 to 15 houses on there. I can't imagine what rates the council is going to get from that. It'll certainly help pay for the maintenance of that reserve, but also the intensification. That where are the children going to go and play? You know, they have no garages, a lot of these houses, so they don't have any outside play areas. So we don't have it. We're on a 300 square metre site, and there's no play area around our home. That's why we chose it. We're a bit older now. We don't want the effort of mowing lawns.
Thank you very much.
Okay, councillors, I've got 3 more questioners, so I'll just ask us to keep it as tight as we can. Councillor Coombe.
Thanks, Chair. Tēnā kouroua, Stephen Louise. Thank you for coming along and presenting. In terms of looking at options, I'm interested in exploring options, and I totally understand you didn't like the suggestion of community purchase. That was it's just looking at what those options might be. So Nothing's on the table, of course. So if you feel that that's not an option, that's fine. But we are, for example. Just finish my question. So, Council, you might have heard of the Kohimarama Forest, and we're looking at options of where we.
Councillor.
Not even. Well, just I'm using it as an example. I'm just using it as an example.
We don't necessarily need that example.
Okay.
Yeah. Go to the question. Thank you.
So there are examples across Auckland where council can partner around open space. So you don't need to answer this question now, but I'm interested in exploring what those options might be.
Well, we're interested in you keeping the reserve and then us engaging with the communities to see what is possible. I went to Japan about 25 years ago and was in Tokyo, and I was amazed at the greenness of Tokyo, and it has reserves everywhere. And the forefathers back in the 1600s, when they developed that city, had the foresight to put them there. And there's all this massive high-rise development going on, and they've got green spaces. They're buying more. They bought one 2,500 square metres only about 10 years ago. And so they're developing them. They're putting more in where they can get hold of them. They're certainly not selling them.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My question is just really a clarification question. Just listening to the answers, Chair, so if you can just indulge me, I just want to be very clear about the presentation. Look, I have visited the reserve, so my question is about not only retaining the current green spaces, it's obviously the thrust of your presentation here, and thank you, I do take on the points that you've made about it might be nice if it was retained, but need further development with drainage and maybe a playground. But my question is, do we not only need to keep this space for the current population, and I take on the point about the school children and the needs and the moral purpose here from the presenters, Mr. Chair, but there's also the current situation, but there's also potential growth. So specifically my question is, if this notice of motion is successful and this park is retained, is that ample green space for that community for the foreseeable future, i.e., or do we need to be looking for more green space as well? So I'd just like to be clear on that.
I have a quote, and you shouldn't do nothing because you can only do a little. Keeping what we've got is doing the little bit. And from what I understand, council's finances are really stretched, and I think it's unlikely that council's going to be buying more property. The developer in 14, which is just adjacent to this, it'll be great if they bought that and expanded the reserve, but I can't see that happening.
Okay, is that enough, Councillor Sayers?
I think it's probably not as direct as a question, but I'm interpreting that, keeping what we've got will be enough, getting more is going to be difficult. Yeah, thanks.
Well, more would be better, but what we've got, you can kick a ball, it's 2,500 square metres, and you can play cricket on there. Well, I'm not sure what else you need. It services that local community, and so it is actually for the locals. There are quite a few, and there are going to be one heck of a lot more. 14 is the number of sections in our street, and each one could have 4 or 5 on it in the future. And we're not talking about in the next 2 or 3 years. We're talking about in the next 50, 100, 500 years.
Yes. No, well noted. Yeah, thank you very much for your response there. That is helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Sayers. I'll put myself on the question order here because just referencing one of the answers to Councillor Dalton's questions around housing, someone who lives in a townhouse development myself, I want you to explore what did you mean by social issues relating to the type of building that's proposed around the area, and could I ask you to expand on that, please?
Are you talking to me? Yeah. So when I was talking about that, I was meaning what I'm seeing in schools with the Kāinga Ora developments, where people who are without housing, okay, are moving in, and what we're ending up with is it all their social issues that are happening in their homes are also playing out in the classroom. I don't think I need to expand much more. People who need to be in Kāinga Ora housing, there are reasons for that, and their lives are not straightforward. They are complex and they are difficult. And it seems to be becoming more and more the norm in New Zealand.
Okay, thank you. So with the promise that it will be very short, I go back to Councillor Walker. Thank you.
A very short question. If we look at reserve space in the area that people enjoy, including children, as it stands now, there's quite an extent of coastal land around the fringe, which will be gone through sea level rise in the conceivably short, medium, and absolutely the long term. Do you know of any proposal to substitute for that in the area?
I don't think there is, no.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen Loyes. Thank you for that. And certainly a lot of questions, but you did very well, so thank you. I will ask Councillor Young to move it this time and Councillor Stewart to second. Is that all right? Perfect. All those in favour? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Carried. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you. Moving on to our final item of Public Forum 5.3, Leon Goldwater. Cool. Haere mai.
Good morning, I'm Leon Goldwater. I'm a resident in 40-Foot Lane. 40-Foot Lane Reserve is a well-used and much-loved reserve. Well used, you just need to look out there and see the activities going on. People meeting, people picnicking, dogs playing, children playing, people using it as a thoroughfare to go to school. The much loved bit was, I learnt about that when we went to collect submissions for the Auckland Council, submissions that we shouldn't sell the reserve. And collecting submissions was the easiest job I've ever done. We collected many hundred submissions, and there was only one person not in favour of retaining the reserve. That person was a developer, a housing developer, who saw a chance for business for himself. But he did say, I see your point. Many of these people who gave submissions to the council were very angry with the council, angry because they saw that as the council selling off their green spaces, which they already owned. And the submissions were a compelling and unanimous opinion that we should keep these reserves, in particular 40-foot. My wife and I moved to 40-Foot Lane 2 years ago, and part of the reason we went there was the charm of the reserve. We are really gutted at the thought that we could lose that reserve. If we should lose it, we have decided that we will make plans to leave Auckland City. If we do keep the reserve, we have decided we will in conjunction with council, start fundraising in our local community for a playground to go in one corner of the reserve, which would enhance its already beauty and use. So I urge us all to support Sharon Stewart's motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for presenting. I have two questions so far, Councillor Watson and then Newman. Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Leon. I just want to pick up on your comment to do with what seems to me to be the extraordinary number of submissions. So I think in the first presentation we heard about 1,145 generally to do with the preservation of open space, but the vast majority of them to do with 40-foot lane, in fact 672 from one community coordinator. That would seem to me to be an extraordinary expression of community interest in this one particular, this particular location. Given that often local boards, participation rates can be quite low. Why do you think there was that huge response generally, but also particularly in respect of 40-foot lane?
Well, because it is a well-loved green space in the Sunny Hills area. Everybody knows about it, and everybody would be very sad to see it go as a green space. Yeah.
Thank you. Moving on to Councillor Newman.
Yeah, look, thank you, Mr. Goldwater. I mean, a cynical line emerging this morning, I think, is that it's up to the Ministry of Education to open up its grounds after hours for kids. Of course, the school boards need to protect their respective campuses. I think that's cynical. What I'd like to do, Mr. Goldwater, is get your understanding as to what, I'd like to ask you, do you believe it's the core purpose and function of municipal and regional government to retain parks and open space for its communities? We have the Reserves Act. This has been a function of local government for a long time now, although that is obviously appears to be changing. Do you think it's a core role for us, or do we have to simply just go cap in hand to the ministry and say, look, we can't do it anymore, so please open up your grounds?
I think it's as important a part of the city infrastructure as rubbish collection and water supply and public transport. It's all part of what makes life happen or not happen. As Louise, previous to me, pointed out, it's an important, reserves are important for our mind, if not for our bodies. So we have to have green space, and of course they are important for our bodies in terms of exercise and in terms of environmental protection, in terms of absorbing greenhouse gases and minimising climate change.
Okay, is that us? Yep. Cool, excellent.
No, Mr. Goldwater is very compelling. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Do we have any other questions? Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Leon. Thanks for coming in. Cool. So I will, and you know what, we'll go back to Councillor Stewart and Councillor Young. Do you want to move and do you want a second? Fantastic. Very easy. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thanks everyone for coming in. I know it's tough to give up your time and we really appreciate your insight. Thank you. Moving right along to our partners in governance, the Howick Local Board. We have a number of people here. I hope I don't miss anyone. I'm really sorry if I do. I've got Adele White, the Chair, who will be speaking to us today, but we've also got John Spiller, the Deputy Chair. We've got Bo Burns, Bruce Kendall, Mike Turinsky, and David Collings. I think I've got everyone right. Excellent, thank you. Okay, so Local Board has 10 minutes to present to us and then questions. So, Chair White. had 5 minutes whispered to me.
She saved me a few minutes there. My name is Adele White, and this morning I'm representing the views of the Howick Local Board regarding the sale of the Pocket Park in 40-foot Lane, Sunny Hills, Pakuranga. As the result of the emergency budget in 2020, our board was asked to consider asset recycling and provided with a list of proposed properties. We visited all sites in question. In our business meeting of Monday the 17th of August 2020, we voted on a recommendation to dispose of 5 properties of pretty substantial value and unanimously voted on a recommendation to retain 4 sites, all being reserves at 76R Aberfoldy Avenue, 111R Golflands Drive, 31 Aspiring Avenue, and 9R 40-foot Lane, which I'm addressing today in the hope that this sale can be presented. Slide 2, please. This is a public park, and it's important to our community, for our children. Building rules are permitting residential developments with apartments that fully occupy the section, leaving no yard. Children should be able to run, play and enjoy the outdoors in a safe environment that a family can walk to. With or without play spaces, parks are a destination for parents with toddlers for socialisation and play. Our local parks play a part in our physical health, being a natural destination for walkers as a part of daily fitness regime, and for the elderly, often for rehabilitation. This park is an off-leash area for dogs also. Parks provide community connection. This park is a gathering place for local residents, be it a chat with a passerby, a street barbecue, or a neighbourhood sports game with the kids on a summer evening. It's commonly used for children's birthday parties and other group gatherings such as the street Christmas party. Parks like this are valued for the significant amenity and recreational opportunities they add to the neighbourhood. 9R 40-foot Lane is no exception. The chance to see and hear bird life in backyards and nearby reserves is extremely important to many people, as is engaging with nature through trees and wildlife. These important green spaces help people maintain an equilibrium in their lives. Selling local reserves is inconsistent with the Council's goals of achieving greater urban canopy cover. Parks are important for our mental health. In these stressful times, mental health is important. Our parks provide a peaceful, neutral place to go and take time out, with open space, green grass, and trees providing a calming environment. Outcome 2 of the Howick Local Board Plan states our aim to provide well-planned public spaces that support active, healthy and sustainable lifestyles. And it's also fitting to the Board's aim to provide a healthy Howick in ensuring that the hauora of our community. Slide 3, please. The land belongs to our community. When Pakuranga was subdivided and built on, much of this in the 60s, developers, and I think it was Fletcher's in this case, contributed these pieces of land to council, ensuring that the people in these neighbourhoods would have an attractive and accessible environment which would contribute to their health and well-being. The presence of this park continues to be appealing to those purchasing homes in this location, but more importantly is a well-utilised and loved toanga of 40-foot Lane. On behalf of the Howick Local Board, I thank you for the opportunity to present this feedback, which we believe is in the interest of all residents in the Howick Ward, and particularly of those in Sunny Hills, Pakuranga. Ngā mihi kia koutou.
Kia ora. Thank you, Chair. So moving on to questions now, and I have one so far from Councillor Coombe.
Kia ora, Chair. Tēnā koe, thank you for coming along and presenting today, and ngā mihi to all of your board members. My question is very quick. The annual budget includes 20 million for open space. Can you remind me what the local board's position was on the annual budget?
What element of the annual budget?
annual budget, when you gave your feedback on the annual budget, can you remind me what your local board input was in terms of your position on the budget?
I'm not quite sure what part of it you mean.
Did you support the annual budget?
Yeah, in essence we did, yes.
Great,
In
thank
essence.
you.
Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Adele. I'm just curious to know if the Howick Local Board are aware of the set of principles that are supposed to guide the sale of assets such as this. And I think in particularly the first principle, in fact, which says effective governance and decision-making, the governing body, Finance and Performance Committee, after considering the views and preferences of local boards, approves any property for disposal. So I just want to be very clear, Adele, that in terms of the views of your local board and your preferences, you have been very consistent with respect of this property.
Absolutely, totally, yeah. It is our board's desire to maintain all green open spaces in our area, and we do not believe in the sale of reserves.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just add to comment? In regards to Councillor Coombs' question. Oh, sorry. We actually did support the annual budget, but with the proviso that we didn't want any reserves to be sold to meet that budget. So just want to add that, just to support the chair.
Yeah, that's good work. Yep.
So moving on to Deputy Mayor Cashmore online.
Thanks very much, and apologies for not being there in presence. We might have COVID in our house. Adele, nice to see you, and the local board members also. My question is covering off the fact around equity and the fact that your local board has a position of not selling down green space where virtually every other area in the city has done a degree of sales. Do you perceive that your position is one of equity compared to the rest of the city?
Yeah, I'm happy that it is, because we did give you 5 other fairly substantial properties, and the green open spaces were really significant to us. There were only 4 of them, and we've managed to retain 1 so far.
Thanks for your reply.
Cool. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And Councillor Newman online.
Yes, good morning, Adele. My question to you is the timing of the board's acquiescence with the discussion when it came to, bring us the land that we can sell, we need to sell. Would you think that there might be a different position today had you known the scale of the impact of the intensification that is being mandated, by virtue of the plan change required, having seen the Parliament's changes to the Resource Management Act and the NPSUD? Is there a need for us to really rethink this whole approach at divestment of open space in lieu of those changes?
No, it's still our position to retain all green open spaces and reserves in our area.
Thank you, Adele.
I think they're even more important now with the type of intensification that is being introduced.
Councillor Walker.
Has your local board worked through a climate change adaptation plan for its area yet? The first one was Whangaproa. Has yours done that?
No, we haven't.
Okay, and in a case where that plan would identify, as it has done for Whangaproa, the loss of esplanade and reserves because of sea level rise, has there been any work done on that in any timescale or the like?
No, there hasn't. There's been work on coastal erosion and some of the downfalls of the weather and whatever the things that have occurred along the way that have taken sand from our beaches, ruined the coast in the way of the rock interfaces and things like that. But there's been no work in the area that you mentioned.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I have no more speakers. Excellent. Thank you so much for coming in, Chair White.
Thank you,
Very good.
Chair.
Okay, we have a motion on screen, councillors, to receive, and I'll go back to ask Councillor Young to move it. Councillor Stewart to second. Kapai? Awesome. Okay, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, local board. Yep. So there's no extraordinary business. We obviously do have one notice of motion. Thank you, Councillors Young and Stewart. So moving straight on to item 9. Now this is unusual for us as a body, so I've taken advice on how to run this particular section on the notice of motion, so here we go. I'll ask Councillor Stewart to formally move the motion and Councillor Young to formally second. I will ask Councillor Stewart to briefly, as in 1 or 2 minutes, just tell us what we're doing. So without necessarily going to the advocacy points, because we'll come to that in the next section. Does that work?
Yes, well, I just want to thank first of all the 8 councillors that signed the notice of motion so we could try and revoke the decision of the 17th of September 2020 at the meeting of the Finance and Performance Committee for the disposal of the revocation of 9R 40-foot lane, Sunny Hills. So do you want me to say anything more? Or
I think that's us.
that's enough? I just want to... Thanks.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. So we've heard from Councillor Stewart, members of the public, the Howick Local Board on the notice of motion to revoke the 17 September 2020 Finance and Performance decision to dispose of 9R 40-foot lane. We have a memo from the General Manager of the Value for Money Committee, which was circulated to the committee and published on Nexus Friday the 22nd of July for your reference, councillors. Very importantly, this reiterates previous advice from staff, which hasn't changed in this respect, and outlines the implications of revoking the previous decision. So just to be clear, the staff advice hasn't changed. So we will be asking questions and staff are available for questions, but just so that councillors are aware of that point. It is now for us as elected members, in the view of this committee, to consider the motion before us as a political decision. So without further ado, we have a video and then I'll... Yeah. Oh, sorry, one moment, guys. Sorry, I did say we haven't done this before, right? So anyway, my apologies. We do have a video that has been very helpfully provided. What I will do is I will ask Councillor Stewart to make her 10-minute speech and introduction to this. As part of that, Councillor Stewart will introduce the video that's been prepared. After that, we will have questions. Cool? Fantastic. Okay. Councillor Stewart, take it away.
Right, so I'm speaking...
Yeah, the 10-minute,
okay.
yeah, cool.
All right, so it might not be quite the 10 minutes, but I'd also like to thank the local board and the local residents who put in a huge effort with the submissions for the reserve. And I'd also like to thank board member David Collins, because I know he presented before the commissioners, and even the commissioners were not persuaded that this should be sold, that it should be kept with the community. They felt that it didn't meet the criteria in Council's open space assessment for meeting community needs now and into the future. So the high level of local concern and opposition from residents to revoke the reserve status was noted by the commissioners, and so I really do hope that all of us sitting around the table take note of that, because it could be your reserve next time. Already there's a lot of housing intensification in the roads surrounding, which we've already heard about. The park surrounds suburbs with, there's a lot of people that, and families and people with dogs that use this park as a dog off leash. And as we've been alerted to the reserve on the boulevard, is actually quite slopey and it's not really very suitable for football or cricket or whatever, and so that's no good. Children do use this park for cricket and kicking a ball and birthday parties, and there's a lot of families that actually have moved back into the area that perhaps they'd lived in the area, moved out, had families themselves, and they've come back to live in the area, and they moved back to be near this reserve, so they could do all the things and have all the happy memories. But I think we also have to remember that when all this was proposed, the intensification wasn't quite as it is now. So the proposed intensification completes. When it completes in Auckland, there'll be very limited green space left within the intensified areas. People, they need to have breathing spaces for walking and doing their exercises. Also, we're starting to live in a more intensified city. These hard surfaces they'll absorb more heat, and the temperature will increase due to climate change effects. I actually had Simon Wilson just asked me about these schools, the Sunny Hill Primary School, which is nearby, and it hasn't got a huge number of pupils there yet, but with what's happening with this intensification, it won't be long, and it will. So, and with the having gated schools and everything, which is something that is happening everywhere, we will need to have more and more of these green spaces. So, anyway, with all this, losing this green space would mean that we'll probably suffer more from a heat island, which is very harmful for the children and elderly due to respiratory problems. We've got the small reserve with the residential area will help people stay healthy, and we need to have more tree planting in the reserves to absorb the heat. So keeping these green spaces within the city should be part of the climate change adaptation strategy. And I think if we all really believe and we know that climate change is coming, I think we need these green spaces. And I think people like the Fishers and Wolf Fisher, they have bequeathed a lot of land in the Pakuranga and the Manukau area, and they've done it for that very reason. They had a vision and they realised that green spaces are really, really important for the well-being of our people. And what we've just been hearing also, we've got a lot of young people that are now a little bit out of control. We've got 7-year-olds and 13-year-olds that are doing ram raids. We've got a lot of mental health issues. We really do need to have this green space, and I really hope all the councillors around the table and those that are not here, that are listening online, they will support this, because it was only a couple of weeks ago that a lot of us councillors, and I think all of us, actually agreed to the purchase of land in Ōrākei. And we actually purchased that green space.
Councillor, I've already warned someone else about this once. Can we just move on from that topic, please?
Sorry? Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry about that. I do apologise. I hadn't. Okay. That's okay. Sorry to interrupt. Okay. Right. Okay. Right. So, anyway, the most important thing is that once the land is gone, it's gone, and we won't be able to replace it. And I think, listening to what we were being told by Mr. Strickland about over in Japan, it looked very, very green. What we're going to see, we're just going to see all these houses. We're going to have people are not going to be able to park on the streets. We're going to have problems with waste, the waste management. We're going to have a lot of issues. So I really do think that we do need to support this motion today, and I do apologise for the other thing, but I actually thought it was out there. No. Okay. Thank you. It is now. Sorry about that.
Councillor, would you like to show the video as well?
Thank you.
Cool, thanks. Let's cue it up.
Is now we won't be able to come here and it'll just be full of like lots and lots of houses.
I'm really gutted that this land has been sold because I've been here since I was 4 years old and this land has always been here. I played in here when I was younger and we've had so many parties as a street here and it's just meant so much to me and it's just so sad that it's gone. The memories from walking to school and from with my grandpa is a big memory for me because he's gone now. And that's a really big memory I've had from him and they're just going to be gone now, replaced with all these houses. And I just wish that they never took this land from us because these memories are part of me.
I feel betrayed by the council, just have lost faith and actually really despair for what Auckland's going to be like in the next 20 plus years, because we're going to have, with the new Resource Management Act, we're going to have houses going higher, using more land, and we'll have no green spaces left. And Auckland's just going to be a very unpleasant place to live, and as a result, we may well leave Auckland.
Well, I feel that we've just been ridden over and they're corrupt. They don't want to listen to people that pay their rates and want to live in the city.
I mean, the only reason I believe the council are really having to do this is to offset the deficit that they've got. But when you think about the ways they achieve that, there was a number of properties that were revoking or looking to revoke. A number of them were actually they're not used, they were just streets, or they might have been houses that they had taken and could put back into the market because they didn't need them anymore. But not valued parks, you know, I mean, a valued park, that'll get a one-off payment. It won't make a difference really towards the overall deficit that's ongoing. And once it's gone forever. It's not, we're not going to get another one.
Kia ora. Yeah. Cool. That's us, Councillor Stewart? Fantastic.
Thank you.
Cool, thank you very much. Speaking of an unusual process, we're now going to questions. Now, we actually have an opportunity to ask questions of the mover of the motion, if there are any, which is rather unusual, but I'll open up for questions now. Cool, okay, no questions. We do have staff available. As I've said, it's really more of a political discussion, but we do have opportunities for questions there as well. I'll ask Ross Churnside to join us quickly. I have Councillor Hills, Walker and Dalton. And thank you, Ross, wherever Ross is. Ross, there you go. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, this was voted on by 19 out of 21 of us at the time. Only the 2 councillors from Howick opposed, so that's how we got here. But I guess my question for Councillor Stewart is, because this was done as part of the emergency budget and the fact we had to raise 240 million or dramatically increase the rates, where would this $2 to $3 million where will that come from out of the budget? Does she know? Because it's already budgeted for.
Councillor Stewart.
Well, I just think that there's other areas that we could probably take money from. I think, you know, we're spending an awful lot of money on some of our cycleways and a lot of money, and there's, you know, with Auckland Transport and the likes, but I think the only reason that there was just the 2 of us at the time, I know it was an emergency budget, but But I don't think all the councillors were really aware of these sites. And I can remember when I was a councillor for Manukau, all the councillors would actually, when we were having anything like this, we would actually hop in a bus and we would all go out and we would all have a look at it. And this hasn't happened, and I just appreciate that there's a handful of councillors around the table and some of those that are at home watching that have come and had a look at some of these sites. But I think Howick has actually, we have been very kind I think there has been an awful lot of money from Howick that has gone towards helping with this emergency budget. But these are some of the reserves that we were very, very firm and strong. The local board, they were very firm as well. We didn't want to sell these properties, and yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. I've got Councillor Dalton now. Is this to Councillor or staff?
Staff.
Okay.
One for Ross and one for Peter.
Cool. I've got Councillor Walker and Cooper. Can I just ask very quickly, Councillor Walker is staff or councillor? Staff. Councillor Cooper online, staff or councillor?
I just wanted to find out where that advice from the staff was on Nexus. Couldn't find it.
Okay, it's on the meeting, on the F&P meeting, it should be. Cool. I'll have a bit of a look on Nexus and I'll come back to you on that question. Okay, Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Chair. Ross, I'm not sure if you can answer it, but there's been a lot of conversation around intensification of housing changing from the advice that we first received, given the MPSUD Enabling Housing Act. Do you know if the advice on the projection for housing or population growth around this reserve, does that advice stand?
Yes, so through the Chair, I think the first point in response to the Councillor is that the current open space provision policy is predicated on proximity and access to open space, not on a ratio of a certain amount of open space provided by a certain number of people, to provided for a certain number of the population, which obviously would change with intensification. You know, if we look at the current, changes that are going through, under the National Policy Statement and through to a reconsultation of the unitary plan, the original unitary plan does allow intensification in this area, and you've heard from Mr. Lombard in particular outlining that is occurring at this point in time in the community. But we don't anticipate any greater intensification through the changes to the National Policy Statement, nor because it's not in a walkable catchment around one of the centres, it's not on a major transport link. So the unitary plan provisions in general will be the ones that carry forward.
Thank you. That's my understanding. My second question, Peter. 19 of the 21 councillors did approve this reserve as part of asset recycling. Have any of the councillors supporting the notice of motion provided how we're going to fill that gap of $3 million, and any ideas, any solutions?
Thank you for the question, and I can answer the previous question. Item 9, additional information on the notice of motion is where you'll find the staff report memo in Nexus. Not that I'm aware of, Councillor Dalton, I haven't been provided with any. The memo that is item 9 there does talk about how asset recycling is one of those important levers, and means that other aspects such as reductions in the levels of capital investment or service level reductions aren't needed to the same extent. There's other items within the memo that talk about the financial consequences and the requirement of having a balanced approach to where we are. What we're doing with asset recycling maintains the confidence of our funders and stakeholders. So those aspects all come together. But quite crisply, I haven't received any alternatives for that funding.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. And I'll just follow that up as well, Councillor Dalton. There is a strong political element to that question, and Councillor Stewart has answered that in the previous answer. Councillor Walker.
Sure. I asked earlier around whether the council has done any study around climate adaptation as it has done, say, in Whangproa, which identifies specifically the loss of reserve and esplanade space around the coastline. And I just wondered if you could clarify whether any of that, or the lack of that, has informed your decision making. That is, the loss of reserve space in the area and what follows, the need to replace that against the background where sea level rise will effectively eliminate the esplanade reserve in the vicinity.
Through the chair, I'm not sure that's a question for myself. The councillor mentioned through your decision making, and this committee are the decision makers.
Yeah, thank you, Ross. I would say that that would be more of a political question. I'd invite Councillor Stewart if she has an answer to that from the political side of the equation. And maybe Councillor Walker, if you want to repeat it, that'd be really helpful. Yeah, thank you.
So Sharon, we know from other areas where the council is working on coastal adaptation that the present areas of Esplanade Reserve and the coastline are effectively lost. And they are part of the reserve network that is presently taken into account for reserve provision for recreation. Has there been any study informing this sale around that significant loss of reserve space in the vicinity?
No, I don't believe so. But once again, as I said, the commissioners actually, they supported retaining this reserve for the people of Sunny Hills, and yeah, and I would say that some of those commissioners are planners, and I'm sure that they would have probably considered that, but I don't think the council's actually done anything on that. I don't think they've done a study on it. But for the amount of money that we would get for this, I mean, once it's gone, and we'll never ever be able to replace it again. And we know that we've got a tsunami of apartments and people coming into our community, and for the mental health and the wellness of our community, we have to keep these green spaces. And in fact, when things start to come right for Auckland Council, which I'm sure they will one day, I think we actually need to be out there buying more green space. We need that green space, and I mean that is one of the reasons why we actually pay development contributions. That's supposed to be all part of it. So, but I do think that the council they have not done that study, and I think you're quite right. Along the Rotary Walkway, at the moment we're doing a whole lot of work trying to keep it together, and I'd just like to say that we've got board member Bruce Kendall. I've been out and about with Bruce looking at some of our reserves that are on the coast, and we are starting to lose a lot of this land. And but this is land. This is a parcel of land which the locals have told you it's well loved, well used, and it is a place it is a place that people can. A lot of developments will not have any land, and people that have got pets, have got dogs, they need somewhere to take them. So please support the people of Sunny Hills. I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
I've got another question. I'll address it to Ross, and it may be that it flicks over to Sharon. Assuming that we do need to purchase some additional park space in the vicinity, have you or has your department done any costing on what might substitute for this area, for this particular park? And I'm assuming that if we had to replace it, because there is no vacant space, we would have to be purchasing houses with houses on them that are, I think, in excess of 1.5 million or the like in this vicinity, and by my calculation this site would require the purchase of about 5 properties at least. Have you done any calculations just looking forward to go to this, Ross?
Yes, so through the chair, no, there has been none of that work, as the councillor described, completed, for the simple reason that the original assessment completed by staff was that it did not make a good contribution to the open space network and did not align with the open space policies. So, there isn't a thought that you would replace this with some other open space in that area, in that core geographic area, that is.
My last question is just directed to Sharon Stewart. And basically, Sharon, where will the children play? Where will the children play within this area?
On the streets.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Walker. And yeah, just in relation to that question of Ross, I'll direct councillors to that memo, which should be on Nexus, and was also emailed to you on Friday afternoon around staff advice, and that will answer, I think, some of these questions that are coming through. Sorry, Councillor Stewart, yes.
Yeah, just one thing. I think this council is that, has supported climate change. And I mean, this is something that we really have to consider. And the selling of these reserves is going against climate change in the way that I explained before. That
This is not this isn't a point of debate section, it's questions. Yeah, so I'll pretend that I asked about climate change. Councillor Cooper. Councillor Cooper online. Or it might come back to you.
No, sorry, just a bit slow there. Councillor Stewart wondered, you just talked a lot about that we need parks. I just wondered then why did you vote against the 29 million for park acquisition in the budget?
I actually voted against the budget. Some parts of the budget I supported, but when it came to the actual vote, I didn't support the budget because I didn't support a lot of what was in the budget. So I, like a number of other councillors, could not support the budget. We actually abstained because there's a hang of a lot of the stuff that was in the budget that we could not support.
That's okay. The rest of us voted for the $29 million for park acquisition. Thank you.
Thank you. And before I go to Deputy Mayor Cashmore, just acknowledging once again kind of the unusualness of this process, and I think, to be honest, a bit of a lack of comfort with councillors asking councillors across the table on things, but that is how the process goes. So just acknowledging that. Deputy Mayor Cashmore, sorry, Linda, were you finished? Yeah, cool. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Mr. Churnside, if I may. And that question is, Ross, given the data when the initial decision was made to put these this particular block of land up to the commissioners for a revocation process, was there anything untoward or exceptional that said that we needed additional or retention of this park space in this particular locality as compared to the standard policy for the whole of Auckland? Or was it pretty much as a well-serviced area for park space?
Yes, so through the chair, there is well served. There is another park about 150 metres away from this location, the Boulevard Park. Policies applied consistently across the region. Staff have re-looked at the original assessment that was completed and have come to the same conclusion. But at the same time, Deputy Mayor, I would just like to note that the additional piece of information in front of councillors today is the public feedback, and actually you've heard from members of the public, and that is the one bit of difference between when you made the decision and where you are today.
Thanks, Ross, and I'll hold a speaking point, if I may, please, Mr. Chair, on exactly that point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I have 4 more questioners, and I'll go to Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. No, I just want to pick up on the commentary about the unitary plan zoning. I'm looking at and this is for Ross, the current zoning, of course, is mixed housing suburban. As happens with all medium density residential standards proposed by the NPS, this area gets upgraded effectively to mixed housing urban, which is a quantum jump in the intensification that's enabled. So, Ross, I just wanted to check that your commentary on the current situation, which we saw referenced in terms of development that's already occurring, the infill housing that's already occurring, but I just want to seek your clarification that there is a difference between mixed housing suburban and mixed housing urban, and that difference is significant in terms of the intensification that's enabled.
Through the chair, that's the statement the councillor has made is correct, but your policy provision still comes back to proximity within 400 metres walkable catchment of open space.
I guess the point, and this may be a question better for Councillor Stewart than Ross, in terms of the current situation Auckland and indeed New Zealand, but particularly Auckland is facing, has not been anticipated. So if we go back to the July 16 Finance and Performance meeting in 2020 that's been referenced here, there was no sense of this tsunami of intensification that is coming a consequence of the government imposition. So in some ways, this is a very opportune moment to take stock, and I'm looking at your notice of motion and the graphics you've applied with respect of the planning enablement, Councillor Stewart. So I would just simply ask you that in respect of that difference between mixed housing suburban, the status quo, and what is now enabled, that is actually a bit of a game changer for situations like this in terms of open space provision. Is that one of the central tenets of your arguments as well?
Well, yes, it certainly is. And I know that some of the submitters here today, they actually moved knowing that the unitary, what the unitary plan had planned, and they moved into that area fully knowing that things have changed. It's been a real game changer. So, yes, I totally agree with what your comments.
Thank you very much. I've got 4 more questioners, and just to let everybody know that we're going to go to lunch after the questions, so get them in now, right? And obviously after lunch we're going to have the debate. So if you want to really make a debate of it, then maybe after lunch we'll have our sandwiches and our tea. Okay, Councillor Newman.
A couple of questions, Ross. Firstly, to you. So, I mean, you're the GM for value for money in the finance group. I wouldn't normally expect to be receiving advice from you on a planning debate, but you surmised in your presentation that you're giving an assessment based on planned development in the area, and you're expecting that you're not forecasting a heck of a lot more development that is planned. Would that be an accurate summation of what you presented?
Through the chair, no, I don't think so. What we've said I suppose the first thing is my role here is to bring together various parts of advice, so you have a joined up picture across various elements. What I said earlier and what the memo said is that there is likely to be a zoning change in that area, but that will not change the walkable catchment that this area serves, around 400 metres walkable catchment to open space.
And would it be fair to say, or you might not be able to answer this, would it be fair to say that unplanned resource consent applications that are lodged for intensification in this location could well happen in the future, which would see quite a significant change, which might not have been forecast at the time this decision was taken? Would you agree with that?
Through the chair, that's something that neither of us really knows the answer to. We know how permissive the national policy statement is, and we know that that there may be intensification in various parts of the city, but we don't know enough around a specificity to this particular area.
Thanks, Ross, and I'll just invite Councillor Stewart if you'd like to respond to that as well, because there is a political element in terms of the Howick ward and what intensification is expected. So luckily to have your expertise as the mover. So yeah, if you'd like to have a go at that one as well, that'd be great if you'd like to.
I think I'll take that after lunch.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't asking Sharon. I also another question of Peter.
Okay, have at it.
Thank you, Chair. Peter, would you expect to be required? Would you ever expect a councillor who signed a notice of motion to require you to speak on their behalf, or would you anticipate that councillors will always speak on their own behalf?
I'm afraid I don't understand the question, Councillor. Could you rephrase for me, please?
The inference I've got this morning from a question was that have councillors who have signed the notice of motion provided you with advice as to alternates? Councillors can always speak for themselves. I wouldn't expect you to speak on their behalf. Would that be accurate?
I'm afraid that's not a question that I've got the ability to answer, Councillor.
I feel that's more of a statement than a question, Councillor Newman. Yeah. Okay, where are we up to? Councillor Coombe.
Thanks, Chair. Kia ora, Ross. Thank you for coming along and supporting this process. I appreciate it is a bit tricky to go between officer responses and political ones, but this one is quite a straight-up question around the mana whenua consultation process and where that ended up, because it's not clear from either the NOM or the memo. So I just wondered if you could just clarify that. Thank you.
Yes, certainly. So through the chair, as you're aware, we have also had a reserve revocation process for this property. As part of that process, the mana whenua iwi across the region were all written to and invited to participate in that process. And one iwi, Ngāti Pau, came back and expressed, opposed all reserve revocation, all disposal of all open space in the Auckland region as a sort of blanket opposition. There was followed up by staff, but there's no specific reasons given on any of the properties, and they were the only mana whenua or iwi organisation to respond to the invitation.
Thank you. Just a quick question from me to Councillor Stewart. Just picking up on a point you've made around mental health and intensified housing. Just wondering if you could expand upon that.
Well, if there's, I guess it's if you haven't got any green space and the children haven't got anywhere to play and they're only going to have to play in the streets, I think open green space is really, really important for not only children but a lot of adults. We have a lot of teenagers. We have a lot of people that use that park, and I've actually seen, people in the summertime they sit under a tree and they read a book. It's a nice quiet park, and because it is a dog off leash park. It's just a place for people to go, and I think if we get rid of all of our reserves, and I mean this is just the start. Once it's gone, and if we allow this to happen, in another couple of years' time, we're going to probably have a lot of other reserves and things that'll be sold. Is this the way that we're going to start budgeting our books, by selling all of our parks and reserves? And this is a much loved park and reserve, and as I said before, there's families that I know that have moved back into the area, and grandparents have moved back into the area, and they've probably lived there and they've moved on and then they've come back, and it's a really special park. And that is why I think there has never been so many submissions for a reserve than this one. And so why, you have to ask yourself, why would the commissioners say that this is one of the reserves that this is the one reserve that they said needed to be kept? And I think that those commissioners, a lot of them are planners, and they will understand that good planning is you've got parks and reserves, and you've got things for mental health, you've got things for, you have to design a good city.
Okay.
And if we're going to take them away.
Yeah. I think we're entering into points of debate which are getting a bit far away from the question,
Okay.
So we'll come back to those. Mayor Goff.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair, and my questions are to Ross Churnside. In reaching the decision to recommend the sale of this property, did you apply the same criteria to that decision as you applied to every other property under consideration?
Through the Chair, yes, that's correct.
Second question is the purpose of the criteria that you applied to ensure that you applied like rules to like situations to avoid the risk of inequity?
Through the Chair, yeah, that's correct. Ultimately, the Council's policy position is to obtain equitable provision across the city.
Thank you. And my third question, through you, Mr. Chair, I'm reading the decision of the Independent Hearing Commissioners. Isn't it correct that they concluded that this park was a reasonable candidate for revocation, quote unquote?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. We have one more question and then we're going to break for lunch and then we're going to come back to debate. And after this question, I'll just set out the debate a little bit. Councillor Filipaina.
Tēnā koe, Chair, and tēnā koutou katoa. I've got questions for Ross. His Worship the Mayor has asked the one around the criteria, but and then one for Peter, if that's okay, Chair. Yep. Kia ora. Ross, can you confirm that there were 333 submissions received for 40-foot lane, and 47 of those 333 asked to present in front of the commissioners?
Through the Chair, you might have to just bear with me a second. I have the Commissioner's report in front of me.
I have the report, Ross.
So have you asked and answered your own question, Councillor? Because I'm looking for it in the report.
Okay. But can I say that what I've read from the PACE committee is 333 submitters and 47 required it. Ross, the other thing that I wanted to ask is that with the decision from FMP in 2020 around the asset sales, do you have any idea how many more properties, green space, that we would have left as a result of that decision left for us to go through the process that His Worship the Mayor outlined?
So through the Chair, I suppose there's probably three elements to that question. In 2020, the Council approved a number of properties for sale, and those properties are in various stages of being, initiate, prepared for sale, or have some statutory processes to be completed, such as the reserve revocation. There are probably around a dozen properties from that initial group where the reserve revocation hasn't been reported back to the PACE committee as of yet. That will be the next meeting for a group of properties. And there are some others where there's been other targeted consultation requirements to still be reported back. The third leg of that really, though, is that was a list at a point in time, and this, the assessing of council's assets and whether they're meeting the best needs of the community is an ongoing process. And we anticipate there will always be some degree of property disposal, whether that is green space, such as in this example, or whether that's other things which are left over from infrastructure development or other properties the council may own. So I see it as an ongoing, continuous element.
Thank you, Ross. And just further to His Worship the Mayor's question around the Commissioner's comments, can I just confirm that the Commissioners said that the 40-foot lane does not meet the other three criteria in the open space assessment, and that the site could be a reasonable candidate for revocation?
Through the Chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Chair, I just got one part.
Yep.
I just got one part for Peter, if that's okay, and that's it for me.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Councillor Alf. Jump in.
Kia ora. Peter, can you just give us a situation report on our financial situation without breaching any confidentiality of the state of Auckland Council since the 2020 decision around asset. But I mean, are we in a better state as a result 2 years down the track, or are we middle of the road, or are we in a worse position?
Thank you, Councillor Filipaina, and through the chair. Since 2020, we've approved the annual budget for the year we're currently in and signalled the trajectory forward for the next few years. That signals the $90 to $150 million operating gap that we have to solution for, and that we have solutions for within that realm, and that will be the focus of the next term of councillors. So my take on that is that the situation has not improved since we initially took this decision, and that the need for a balanced approach and a credible approach remains. That's set out in bullet points or paragraphs 12 and 14 of the memo. That credible financial plan remains crucial to support the confidence of our stakeholders and funders. So the situation has not improved. I won't say any more. It is a situation that we have a plan for. Sticking to that plan is important.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, I just got a supplementary on that. I'm sorry to do this, but I think this question is also crucial. Peter, how important, how crucial are the sale of the properties that we have already identified in relation to options of increasing the rates for our community? How crucial are these asset sales?
Councillor, I'll answer that in a couple of ways. Maintaining the plan and committing to the plan and then actioning the plan is crucial for the credibility in the markets. It shows that we're willing to take hard choices and make the decisions that are required. The question around rates, that comes to the balance of all levers that are used. So to the extent that we don't have debt headroom, that we use or don't use asset recycling, that we reduce services or make operational savings, that is part of the pie, and the other part of the puzzle then becomes the rates. So it's not one you can look at separately. It's part of that balance of all 4 or 5 levers. Reducing the use of one lever would mean that we have to use the others more heavily.
Tēnā koe. Kia ora, Chair.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Ralph. I've got a late one here, Councillor Watson. Small, please.
Yeah, it is a very short one. I just want to follow up on that comment there by the Chief Financial Officer. So am I correct, therefore, in assuming that the credibility of the Auckland Council in the international markets depends on the decision whether to sell 40-foot lane or not?
That's a question for me. Through you, Chair, I don't believe any single decision would breach that area. It's the totality of the decision-making process that the rating agencies make.
Thank you. Totality.
Okay, that ends the questions. Thank you, councillors. Just 2 things from me. First and foremost, I do want to acknowledge that it's very difficult for staff to go through a process like this where we've got questions to staff, then to politicians, then back to staff, going around all over the place. So I just want to really appreciate your assistance today. This committee really does appreciate the answers and the help that you've provided. So thank you for that. Secondly, and just setting out, we are shortly going to go to lunch for half an hour, and then we're going to enter into debate. So I'm going to invite Councillor Young as a seconder to open that debate, and then we will hear from everybody else, and then a right of reply will go to Councillor Stewart. Now, for all of that, it's going to be 5 minutes each, just as per, right? So without further ado, let's go and get a cup of tea, and I will see you back here at 12:35. Oh, ding, 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 ding. Calling the meeting back to order. Welcome back to those of you that are online. I hope you had a delicious lunch. We had a very delicious lunch here of rolls and salad. Very nice. And I would like to open the debate on the item 9 notice of motion. And the process, as I gave the heads up before lunch, was the seconder, Councillor Paul Young, will kick us off. Then we'll just go through the speaking order, so get your names in. I'm sure I'll have plenty of names on this order. And then Councillor Stewart will wrap up at the end. And then we will put the motion, and just a heads up as well as that, so you don't have to say it, I propose that we do a division on this one, because someone will say it, I think. Okay, are we ready to go? Let's do it. Okay, Councillor Young, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank our Howick local board and the Sunny Hill residents for their passionate deputation. Staff consider the land as the suppers. However, I support the opportunity for our colleagues around this table and online to consider the desire of my community to changing the council's decision to sell. I think it's a small loss in the annual budget compared to a great win for us, responding to overwhelming community support to retain this piece of the public land. Particularly, there's no proper amenity assessment of this reserve compared with other nearby reserves. From the information, from the local feedback, the amenity value per square meter is higher in this reserve than other green space nearby. I agree protecting reserves land is critical for future generations, and we don't take the sales of the public space lightly. What we are debating here is, again, a very difficult choice. As a ward councillor, I'm very much torn between my role as a champion for Howick and my regional role looks across the city and what might be best for the people of Auckland. We have heard from our staff, recycling is an important lever for the council, allowing capital to be reinvested in our park network. If the sales of the 40-foot go ahead, it will be a disappointment to our local community. However, I'm glad to see a few reserves have been kept, such as in Golfland, and there are a few recent purchases of opening space for our community in Howick Ward. Thank you to all my fellow committee members for your consideration. Thank you. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor. Moving right along to online, we have the Councillor for the Foe, Tracy Mulholland.
Thank you, Chair. Just, sorry. Can you hear me clearly? Sorry, I'm just wondering whether you can hear me clearly.
Thanks. Yep.
Lovely, thanks, Chair. So 40-foot lane, I think is an excellent, well-constructed notice of motion from Councillor Stewart, and I'm happy to support it. And looking through the history of this item, I believe that perhaps a wrong decision was made, and unfortunately not on just this one occasion, but in relation to this. I think the great thing is we have the opportunity to say there was a mistake made in the past, so let's correct it. I want to also acknowledge all of the supporters in the public forum. Now, with regards to this, the general purpose, I understand, of the Reserves Act, and directly quoting from Section 3, general purpose of the Act is to provide for the preservation management for the benefit and enjoyment of the public areas of New Zealand possessing one recreational use or potential, whether active or passive. And I believe that we have heard today from the public, and whilst, yes, we have individual wards, but we have to think across the whole of Tamaki, but the public in the area have made it abundantly clear that they are using the park for their enjoyment, and it is fit for purpose in that regard. It's also nice to note, just on the comment from the public, Chair, and councillors, that they were willing to put their hands up to contribute to this when they already pay rates So reserves, I think, are for a community enjoyment and not cash reserves for councils. So, and looking at those decisions, I agree that we shouldn't be selling off the land. Just with regards to any doubt about revoking the reserve status, I don't think we should take into consideration that in this case as an opportunity to put a small amount of cash into the coffers. With regards to the financials, and thank you to the team that have provided all of the information, I understood, and I may be corrected because I'm not a valuer, but it's around between $1.72 million in land, but that's only a guess, as I say, and perhaps that is a small amount on our council budget, although I'm always one to say that every cent counts. So with regards to selling, will that have a great impact on the budget, not this particular amount? And considering other aspects of work that we do, I think that is a small sum for the value. And when you look at the history of the land and what the purpose was to put the little pocket park in there, and the demands made, or the requirement made of a developer, I think it all makes sense in what the public in the area was saying. So whilst we do take a regional perspective and we have to approve the sale of some assets, of which I supported in part with regards to some spaces that were actually surplus to requirements or not required, or required more funding than we had, I think that makes sense in terms of a sale, but in this case I don't. And I think that it is good that elected members get to question each other based on a past decision and moving forward, because that's what our duty is to do, serve the public and put forward questions so that we do have a better tamaki in the future. So I ask councillors to also support me with regard to this notice of motion. I thank the Howick Ward councillor. I thank the board and everyone that has taken the time to just sit and listen to each other with regards to this decision. So I'll be supporting the decision, and I ask councillors, please, in this case, to be consistent with regards to the view of the sum that I've heard from, and support the motion. Kia ora, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thank you to the Councillor Sharon Stewart for bringing this forward and for bringing it to our attention.
Cool. Thank you, Councillor. Moving right along to Councillor Sayers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Look, I'll just make a very brief comment. I will be supporting the notice of motion, Chair. It's illogical to sell any park off cheaply now when a replacement one will cost many more times that price in future years. The parks are vital to retain due to Auckland's growing population, and Auckland's growing population needing access to recreational space, and that's the primary reason why I'll be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So far we've only got two more speakers. I'm sure there'll be more people putting their hands up. We'll go to Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. And I think it was Oscar Wilde who once said that a fool is someone who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. And I think this is exemplified in this instance here, particularly as it goes to the value of open space. We heard from some of the members of the public in their submission of the importance of open space, and any of the academic work reinforces that. Green Space Scotland referred to a number of US studies which found that residents who lived in public housing with exposure to nature, open space and trees had far greater mental well-being outcomes and ability to cope with stress, etc. We know that because we've been told it, and it's quite straightforward really, because the impact of green space on mental health includes things just like outdoor activity, exercise, natural daylight, stimulation of the senses and so forth and so on. But it is the proximity of that open space that is important, not a football field across the Pakuranga Highway or an open space up in the boulevard that was quoted here that is surrounded by road, no footpaths, and totally unsuitable for playing sport of any kind on a totally different level of amenity. That seems to have gone unnoticed here. And I would just remember the members here today and online that in terms of the principles that guide the disposal of assets such as this, the first principle that's mentioned, and I brought it up with the Howick chair, in terms of effective governance and decision making, was to consider the views and preferences of the local board. And they have been the model of consistency on that in opposing this sale, and in particular 40-foot lane. And why would they? Well, they would do that because in the first instance they're reflecting the overwhelming view of their community. I mean, the submission process there was phenomenal. I would suggest the biggest response from the Howick ward since this council has been formed. That's one reason. They're reflecting the very clearly articulated views of their community. The other reason, and I only came to realise it myself when I went out to 40-foot lane and had a look, is that this is a wonderful piece of open space for the type of informal activity that we saw taking place there. People walking their dogs, kids climbing trees, a throwback to the good old days of the 60s where you could have a community game of cricket or kids could go and kick a ball around. There's room to do that. A number of the spaces that we provide through our current acquisition policies don't actually provide that now. They may have good amenity in terms of kids' playgrounds and whatnot, but they don't have that kind of open space use that's provided for in 40-foot lane. So that's why the local board are going into bat and their councillors, because this is an ideal piece of open space that is valued by the local community. The other reason, if they keep abreast of any developments that are occurring, is the national policy stuff that's going on, where we have this phenomenal tsunami of intensification coming. All that area now is mixed housing urban, which is a quantum leap in the ability for infill housing, for resource consented developments of more than one property can go up to 7 or 8 with a resource consent. So we could have an absolute exponential growth of the number of people living here, and in particular the number of, excuse me, of the young people. So when you start putting those things together, we have a very compelling case for the value of this particular piece of open space. No, not a piece of open space up in Millwater, not a piece of open space on the boulevard, which is not a sense of any value in terms of this one. So we should be taking it on this individual case. And I fear we're going into the old penny wise, pound foolish mentality where some target of asset sales, which one would have thought in the last few years with the rise in land values and property prices would have seen as a little bit ahead of the 8 ball in terms of the funds that have come in specifically through the asset sales. So we have a situation, Mr. Chair, at its most basic, where the local community, their local board representatives, their councillors have said that this is an important priority for them. It is an existing open space. They should not have to be going to buy, after this ward pays about $170 million in rates per annum, I don't think they should have to be turning around to buy a piece of reserve space back. That is a little perverse, I would say. So we've got an opportunity as the governors around here is to actually fulfil that very first principle, to take on board the views of the local board who represent their local community and maintain, preserve this very much valued piece of open space that all requires us to do is to cut the grass once in a while. That's our capital expenditure on it. And we're doing that at the same time as that the level of development in this area is going to go through the roof. It's already happening under the unitary plan mixed housing suburban. What's it going to be like when the mixed housing urban comes in? So, ladies and gentlemen, I would just simply say in conclusion that the relevant information has been put forward before us today to make the right choice here, and that is to preserve the small pocket of reserve that is so important and so valued by the people we represent as well, not just Councillor Stewart and Young, but us as well as regional councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Moving on now to online, Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the staff and to the presenters from the neighbourhood areas and the Howick Local Board and for the Howick Local Board themselves. I would think that every local board member and every councillor member has tossed and turned over the loss of some parkland for this purpose of that $230 million to save and help preserve our budgets so that we can do other things. I'd also note that we are purchasing $23 million worth of parkland a year as well. So there's a bit of quid pro quo here. The Howick Local Board has been consistent in not supporting any sale of anything. The library sat vacant for 12 years or more from memory. And I did visit 40-foot Lane with Councillor Stewart and the staff and the local board members last year, I believe it was, and I've been back twice since. It is a pretty little park surrounded by nice homes, and it's a great thing. However, there are numerous cases like that right throughout the city, including my ward and yours, where we have had to sacrifice some of these things for the better good. And that's important as well. If we kept every space and didn't do this $230 million worth of asset sales, you're staring at a 10% plus additional rates increase. 10% plus. And I question whether how many people would vote for that. Yes, Auckland is intensifying, and some of this urban new legislation is challenging. But with that comes opportunity to purchase more things and to achieve more. Howick's up for a new big rec centre and potentially a pool. So there are things coming forward that are going to benefit the community. We can't look at these things as one isolated park in an area. This is a region-wide policy that's based upon data and fact. And this particular piece of land does not fit within the recommendations of that data analysis. There is another park space 150 metres away. The commissioners said that they also support revocation, but also asked us to check if we could do something else as far as a local trust. That's been checked out and it's not flowing at all. So, councillors, I know it's a tough choice, and your heart would want to go, oh, let's give this one back. But then I want some back in Franklin, and I'm sure Councillors Walker and Watson will want some back on Upper Harbour and Albany, and Shane will want some back in West Auckland. Where does it end? Where does it end? We've got a policy. We all agree to it by vast majority. We need to stick to it. Otherwise, you unravel it one strand at a time and the whole rope breaks. And that is not in the interest of an individual park, an individual suburb, or Auckland as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Moving on now to Councillor Coombe.
Kia ora, Chair. Tēnā koutou, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this. I think we're all going to be under pressure in our communities to re-look at sales. I know my area, we've got a couple coming through that the community really wants to be re-evaluated. And I think there's good reasons for doing that with the new MPSUD coming in and the housing reforms, that we do need to look at whether we have got the criteria right across Auckland. So I do support that assessment being ongoing. The reason I wanted to make some comments, because I think I owe it to those who've come along to present, ngā mihi, and to local board members and members of the community who've obviously put a lot of work into presenting and explaining why they would like to keep this lovely bit of green space on their street, a bit of green space that I think people right across Auckland would love to have in their street, in their neighbourhood. So I think I owe it to them to explain why I'm not going to support this notice of motion today. We have a criteria that has been really thought through, Mr. Chair, and we've heard that the intensification doesn't alter the assessment that officers have provided. So we need to apply a fair criteria right across Tamaki Makaurau in the interests of equity and fairness, because as we've heard from the Deputy Mayor, if we start unravelling every single sale, then it is going to have a domino effect and we won't actually be applying a consistent criteria that provides that equity across Auckland for green space. We've also heard that we should be listening to the community and supporting the community. Well, the community in Howick supported the annual budget. They supported the climate action targeted rate. The community in Howick supported having budget for open space acquisition. So I find it very surprising that Councillor Stewart, who's putting up this notice of motion, opposed, you voted, well, you abstained against the budget, abstained, which isn't a decision, but you voted against the rating, which is the way in which we raise the revenue to pay for open space. You didn't listen to your community in terms of that vote. So I'm sorry to the community members who are now discovering that their councillor didn't support budget for open space acquisition and didn't support budget for climate action. Because we've heard that a lot this morning too, that we need to preserve green space for climate action. So I do feel that we have to take a principled approach, agree the criteria to our asset sales, and in this case, that criteria has been met. Just a final thought in terms of the options. I did put forward, could there be an option of the community getting together and purchasing this vacant section, this green space? Now, because it is for the benefit of a very small neighbourhood. It hasn't been paid for through rates. We've heard that we would have to raise rates by 10% if we don't do asset sales. So the community haven't paid for it already. But if they want to pursue an option that allows that open space to be retained for a community group to get together, they're obviously very well organised, then I would absolutely be willing to support the options. If the community don't want that, fine. I'm not going to be engaging in that process. It's not my community. But I'm absolutely there to support all Aucklanders explore options to shape and develop the communities in the way that they want. And so I'm here to support that community if they would like to pursue any options. I don't know what they might be, but I'm happy to consider that process, a process that might be put on the table. I'm very happy and willing to explore that. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak, and just to confirm that for the reasons outlined, I don't support the notice of motion. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Mayor Goff and then Councillor Walker. So, Mayor Goff.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to start by saying that parks, open spaces and community facilities are really important in our community. And we've reflected that in our budget, our 10-year budget, because our 10-year budget for those things have gone up from 3.7 billion that we voted in 2018 to 4.56 billion in 2021. That's a $900 million increase. We are increasing parks, reserves and open spaces. We're not reducing them. But what is really important when you have a tight budgetary situation is that you treat people fairly across the board, and you have to learn to prioritise, because everybody in this room knows that COVID knocked $900 million out of our budget. And we couldn't simply say, oh, that doesn't really exist. We can't just go out and borrow to pay for the groceries. We borrow to a sensible and prudent level, largely for capital acquisition. That lever couldn't be further expanded. We have an obligation to find savings, and we've found savings. 120 million last year, and 90 million, I think, Peter, this year. But we've squeezed that saving and cost reduction as much as we can. Then it comes to rates. Rates we've set at 3.5% general rates. And of those that are petitioning for a revocation of this sale, 7 out of 8 voted against the budget. That means a rate increase, a general rate increase of 3.5%. Well, I'm sorry, you cannot, as those councillors tend to do, vote against every revenue raising measure and for every spending measure. That is a recipe for leading to commissioners being appointed, because you can't do your fundamental role as a council, which is balancing your budget and managing your finances prudently. And we had 60 hours of workshop where any of those councillors could have said, here's an alternative way of doing it, but I never heard an alternative way of doing it. The sale of surplus properties is going to raise $244 million. That actually, Chief Financial Officer, I think is the equivalent of a one-off 12% rate increase. You raise about 20 million from a 1%, and you're talking about 244. Well, if you don't want to sell the properties, tell me how you're going to raise that 244 million. And one councillor said, well, we're only talking about one property, but here's where the rub comes. You've got to apply your rules fairly right across the community. You set out your criteria for saying these are properties that are lower priority properties, and then you apply that criteria fairly, without fear or favour, right across the board. The moment that you start to say, we'll make an exception for this property because it doesn't meet the criteria, then at that moment you invite every other community across the city to say, well, actually make an exception for us as well. And by the time you've made an exception of everybody, you're left with nothing out of the 244 million. And Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore is absolutely right. There are all sorts of properties that each one of the people online and around this table could have said, it's in my patch, I'll fight against it. But we can't, because we have to make our budget work. And the sale of lower priority properties is part of that budget. Not to reduce our open public space, but to say we're going to add to it, we're going to create more, but we will apply the same rules for retention or for disposal on all open public space. You cannot have one rule that applies in one area and a totally different rule that applies everywhere else. So for the interests of equity, you set your criteria, you set the rules, you set the standards, and then you fairly apply them right across the region. And that's what our officers have done. They said this land does not meet any one of the 4 criteria that we agreed on as a council for disposal or acquisition of property. And the independent hearing commissioners, let me quote from them. Clause 59, we conclude that in terms of the rationalised parks portfolio, the recreation reserve status of 9R 40-foot lane is a reasonable candidate for revocation. So we got an independent hearing commissioner, or group of them, in to make a decision, and that was their conclusion. So we're not only following what our officials are saying is the fair application of the rule across the whole community, we're also following what the independent hearing commissioners have advised us. And on that basis, Mr Chairman, while I acknowledge the councillors that have moved this notice of motion, I acknowledge the local board for standing up for their community, and I acknowledge the submitters. If I had a choice between a house next door or a piece of grass, I'd go for the piece of grass every time. But we cannot do that and act fairly for the community as a whole, and for that reason, I cannot support this notice of motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Moving on to Councillor Walker.
The outstanding question that I'd pose to councillors and the Mayor and anyone that happens to be listening as an Aucklander is, where will the children play? Where will the children play? It's a classic Cat Stevens refrain, and it's certainly applicable right now. I am fairly disturbed by some of the information that I see put up around the table. One of the things that councillors should know is that when you sell a reserve, the Reserve Act requires that land and the proceeds of it to be sold to pay for reserves. It can't be spent on anything else. It can't be spent to address operational issues in the rates. And there seems to be some confusion around that. Reserves are capital, and they can only be spent by way of sale on other capital in the form of other reserves. So let's make that very, very clear, because that information has not been adequately provided to us, and I will stand by it. It is also very clear, and I certainly established it by way of question, that the impact of sea level rise has not been considered. The loss of the Esplanade reserves, which are significant in the proximity of this area, is going to happen and is inevitable and is already acknowledged elsewhere where this process is underway. It hasn't happened here. The officers have not considered it. There has been no reporting on that. Zero. Yet there are councillors around this table that pretend to be concerned around climate change. Pretend, I say, because when it comes to a decision, as I point out on any number of occasions, on a decision-by-decision basis, those councillors are found wanting. They are not, and I will state it again, not doing the right thing by future generations, especially children. And I address the question again, where will the children play? We're coming out of COVID. We had some marvellous presenters, including a woman who I hold in some esteem on the basis of what she said from her teaching experience about the impact of COVID, the impact on anxiety, the number of children that are presently homeschooled or not even going to school because of a variety of reasons. What do those children need? What is most critical to them? As she said, open spaces in their community that are accessible, safe, places where they can play, which is an innate human experience that everyone needs, children, but also older people. And where are those places? And this is one such place. I also established, by way of questions, that if we do have to replace this reserve, and I would suggest we will in this vicinity, because as Councillor Watson has pointed out, and Councillor Stewart has pointed out, and the people in the community have pointed out, there is going to be huge growth in this area, and all of the councillors know that it's immensely market attractive. If we had some detailed reporting on that, and some forecasting, and some future evaluation, they would tell us that. So we are going to have significantly more density here, and we all know, because we are familiar with the medium density legislation, which we opposed, that there is almost no land now on an individual property for a child to play. It's almost zero. And where the density goes up and that provision for space is on the part of a tiny little deck, that is the future that we face in this area and so many areas, and that is the reality that the councillors know comes into play on the 20th of August next month. This is not just some flippant thing for councillors to consider. This is a reality that faces our community. And what is our responsibility? Our responsibility as custodians, as city fathers, excuse the sexism, but that has been a long-standing expression, is to take into account the needs of future generations. As countless city fathers that have stood and sat in this building, men and women have done before us. And we are not carrying out that role significantly, substantially, and adequately. So in a circumstance where a community comes to us overwhelmingly, as this community has done, both local and more spread, and pointed out the need for this reserve, this park, that is used and loved, and it is supported by the ward councillors, Stewart and Young, and it is supported overwhelmingly by the local board. What should we do? I suggest that our role is to question officers, to actually ask questions. And I say all of that to you. Ask questions. Would you be making this decision if it was in your ward and your local board and your community was overwhelmingly giving you this information? And I would suggest that the answer that you know in your heart of hearts is that answer would be no. You would be supporting that community. This is not my community. but I'm an Aucklander and an Auckland councillor, and I support them wholeheartedly. And if this is voted down, it is an ongoing failure and another reflection of the crisis in confidence that I suggest exists in Auckland around this council and significantly parts of its leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. I have no other requests for speak. I'll just give that a second. Cool, okay. To wrap up the debate, we have the mover, Councillor Stewart.
Well, thank you. I think just about everything's been said, and I think Councillor Walker has really hit it all on the head. And one of the things that I think we really do need to know, sales of reserves, the money from the sale of that reserve, does that really do have to go back into reserve?
Reserves Act 1977.
Okay. So it's a shame we haven't had all that information given to us. But anyway, this really was the last chance for me to try and put this before the council to try and save 40 foot. And that's why I very lucky I got eight signatures to have this notice of motion. And I really thought that you would all really support this. I'm really shocked at what I'm hearing here. I'm really disappointed. When I was part of Manukau Council, we actually came to this Auckland Super City with a lot of money. Auckland Council and Manukau, we came with Auckland Airport shares. We were very careful with our spending with Manukau. We came with a lot of money. Howick hasn't really spent very much money in the time that we've been amalgamated, and this is only just a very small ask. This is a very much loved reserve. It's not even worth a lot of money, but it's worth a lot to the people that live in that community. And we've had the local board here. We've had local submissions here. We've had the local community here. Everybody's stating their case, and Councillor Walker's quite right. It's all about where will the children play, and climate change does come into all of this. You know, I'm really disappointed in hearing some of the councillors talk around this table today about, you know, money. To be honest, it's not, you know, the money that we're going to receive for this is really a pittance, but we can't replace that reserve. So anyway, I just hope that you're all going to really, all of you that are not around here at the moment, if you're online, I really do hope that you really do listen, and you have listened to the community, because really we need your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The debate is concluded. I acknowledge the passion with the debate and that we can share these ideas as a council. Okay, we've got the resolution on screen. To save you the trouble, I'll call a division myself. So, division.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A division has been called on the motion which is on the screen. Can members say yes or no when your name is called? Mayor Goff.
No.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
No.
Councillor Bartley.
No.
Councillor Casey.
No.
Councillor Collins.
Against.
Councillor Coombe.
Against.
Councillor Cooper.
Against.
Councillor Dalton.
Against.
Councillor Darby.
Against.
Councillor Filipina.
Ka hore, against.
Councillor Fletcher.
For.
Councillor Hills.
Against.
Councillor Mulholland.
For.
Councillor Newman.
For.
Councillor Sayers.
For.
Councillor Stewart. MSB Chair Taipari.
Against.
Councillor Walker. Councillor Watson. Councillor Young.
For.
Councillor Henderson.
Against.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. The motion has been lost, 8-13. Okay, moving on. We have some more business, councillors. Auckland Council Business Improvement District Policy. We have Claire and Jill. And I think we've got Ed as well over there. G'day, Ed. Yes. Oh, yes. Just drawing everyone to your attention to the screen, we have another chair's recommendation here as well that Desley and myself support, which basically says, look, there was an ability to request mediation from one side, but not the other. So this is designed to correct that. Yeah. Cool. Take it away.
Kia ora, Chair and councillors. Staff and those online, thank you very much for hearing us today. My name is Claire Siddons. I am the Principal Advisor in the CCO External Partnerships Group, particularly looking at the bid program, and I'm here with my colleague Jill Plume, and we make up the bid team. We're here today to seek approval for the Auckland Council Business Improvement District Policy. That's before you. We want to just give you a high-level overview of the review process. So just to recap, the catalyst for the review of this policy was based on the current policy with a strong focus on the problems, issues and serious concern sections. This came about from over the last 6 years of feedback from both bids, staff, in that the current policy had a number of areas that weren't actually allowing us to address problems in a quick and efficient way. The review process involved the 50 bid organisations across the region, business associations that aren't bids, local boards, and our internal council departments. We also presented to you guys at the beginning of the review in August 2021, and again you saw us at a workshop in May of this year when we presented you with the draft policy. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague here who's just going to do an overview of the feedback received.
Thank you, Claire. So before we very quickly, in a 2-minute recap of the feedback we've received from this policy, Claire and I just want to acknowledge that this has been a real roller coaster of a journey to get this policy to where it is today. There's been a lot of feedback, a lot of emotion, a lot of feelings, and we want to acknowledge that and just reiterate that obviously we're very happy to answer any questions that might come our way from yourself as councillors of things that you might have heard about. From the feedback that was received through the formal part of the process, 2 main groups. The first of all, the bids themselves, and they talked a lot about partnership, and bids themselves were quite surprised that we stated quite clearly in the draft policy we shared with them that there's actually no formal partnership agreement between themselves and Auckland Council. There's a relationship. There's a long-term relationship, there's collaboration and there's working together, but there's actually no formal partnership. They are independent organisations, and in fact we went as far as even stating this in the original existing policy, which is 2016, which clearly said there is no formal partnership. So that was a shock to us, that the bids thought they were in a formal partnership with us. And the second part that we had to look at from the feedback was we shared with our bids a funding agreement, a mechanism literally to get the funding to them. And we used a ordinary grant, council grant funding agreement, and I can tell you that went down not very well. So we also acknowledged that that funding agreement was not fit for purpose, and we took on board an awful lot of feedback from our bids. We listened very carefully, and from that, what you'll find today in the policy before you, the draft policy, is a bid targeted rate grant agreement. It's a very simple document that defines the relationship between Auckland Council, what we're going to do, and the bids, what they're going to do. And we've made it a 3-year agreement. So the bids gave us feedback on partnership and the funding agreement. The local boards gave us feedback too. 18 local boards who had bids in it gave us feedback, plus Poke Papa. And the majority actually supported the draft policy and the funding agreement. They were looking for something. They're looking for better accountability and confidence, I suppose, that they knew what their bids were doing, and confidence that their bids were doing aligning with the bid policy. They were after a more practical issue resolution process where issues could be resolved faster than we had experienced. And a lot of the local boards were actually very acutely conscious that different financial times were coming in the future, and that they may not have the discretionary funds to prop up or share with some of their bids that they traditionally have. So they were very keen on anything to do with the long-term financial sustainability of the bids. We also shared the draft policy and took on board councillor feedback in 2 workshops. And as a result of all of this feedback, we amended the policy, and we shared that policy and the bid targeted rate grant agreement with all of our bids 2 weeks ago on July the 12th. Back to Claire.
Thank you, Jill. So just in conclusion, this has been a long process. We've gathered lots and lots of feedback and information. So what you see before you today is a policy developed with input from council staff and the end users, the bids themselves. We'd also particularly like to acknowledge Cheryl Adamson, the bid manager of Parnell, for her contribution. That has been really, really good. And we really just want to reiterate that we very much welcomed and utilised the feedback received into the document that you see today. In regards to the policy that is before you, it's intended to do is to provide confidence in the accountability of public funds, confidence in the reporting of those funds, and confidence in an issue resolution that is quick and efficient. If approved today, the policy will become operational on the 1st of August in a couple of days. And Jill and I will roll through into a implementation process over the next 3-4 months with communication and networking opportunities to help the bids transition from the current policy into the new policy. So thank you, Chair and councillors, and before you is the Chair's resolution. So I'll hand it back to you for any questions.
Wonderful, thank you very much. I'll ask for a mover and a seconder to put it on the floor, and then we'll go to questions. So Angela, you'll move. Pippa, you'll second. Yeah. Well, no, you're right, actually. I will claim the chair's direct, so I'll go second myself, actually. Very good. Okay, throwing to questions, and we have Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. It was just in terms of what Councillor Henderson and I have heard from Te Atatū Peninsula bid. I just want to make sure when we proposed that if you only collected so much, you couldn't be a bid. Has that now been reversed? Those smaller groups are still able to be a bid?
Through you, the Chair. It comes back to that financial sustainability. If we had a small area, and we do have some bids that get $6,000 a year, if we had an area that came back to us with a teeny tiny amount of targeted rate, we would not be keen. We do say that it needs a baseline of 120k a year to operate effectively. Once you've paid for a resource, paid for a manager or some kind of coordinator, plus had some money left over to be able to actually do anything for your business area, there is a baseline of $120,000 that's the minimum. So if we had a very small area come back, we would not be keen on that because we would know that it would need additional money to be raised. What we have said in the new bid policy that's before you is we would like smaller bids to work their way up, and we suggest a variety of options they can do that, to that 120 baseline over the next 6 years. And what we're asking for is at the end of that period, a total income of over 120. So it could be a mixture of targeted rate plus income from something else, plus income from something else, but it's a total of 120.
So through you, Mr. Chair, we're giving them a chance to build up to that rather than cutting them off straight away.
We would never cut a bid off. I mean, we still work with, and I mentioned, we still work with bids that have absolutely tiny budgets. But we do know that, no, we would never cut a bid off. And we do know that they're the most challenging.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure because it wasn't how I understood it. So I just wanted to make sure that there is an opportunity for them to work their way up because they are doing good work. And it would seem a shame because it is a little bit of a case-by-case basis for each centre, I guess. But no, thank you for that. That helps me very much. And thanks for the work. It's really been great to hear that you've taken on board a lot of what people have said. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Do we have any other questions? I'll ask a follow-up to Councillor Cooper's question just briefly. What is the reasoning for us to have a baseline in place like that?
Through you, the Chair. We know from experience that this program has been working in the region for many years now, and that a baseline of 120,000 allows the organisation to pay a reasonable rate for a resource in the form of an employee or a contractor, and it still allows them on a part-time base to have, probably about 50% of their income available to actually do things that the business ratepayers and the businesses can actually see. It's really important for the program to be visually seen by those that contribute the money, rather than it just go into a resource that is working madly behind the scenes, but perhaps is to the ones that are paying the money isn't as visible. We also acknowledge that if you can't raise enough money to pay a reasonable market rate to a contractor or employee, you're going to get perhaps gaps in the skills and therefore constantly, being in that space of struggling to understand how to deliver, what to deliver, and also through the whole program they've got to answer to those business owners and those ratepayers that pay the money. And there can be a considerable amount of pressure come from those payers because they're paying the money.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Nothing online? Cool. We will move to comment. Would anyone like to make a comment?
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry, who's that? Councillor Hills. Right.
It's Richard.
Jump in.
My chat would not come up, and I'm not sure why, but sorry about that. And I know you can't see it, so I rushed forward. It was just one question, just double checking that the Takapuna Beach Business Association, I know they were quite vocal on their concerns at the time. They're happy too. It sounds like everyone's happy on this new way forward, but I'm just double checking.
Through you, the Chair. Sorry, we were just racing to answer that. Yes, we can confirm we've spoken to Terence a number of times, and he's very happy with the end result of the policy.
Cool, and just want to say quickly thank you. That's a really constructive way forward because I know that everyone was pretty concerned, but thank you very much. That's really great.
Great, thank you, Councillor Hills. Moving to comments, I have Councillor Dalton and then myself. Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Chair. Look, just a few thank yous. It's been a long haul, Claire and Jill, I know, and thank you. It's been months and months, I know, and a really difficult time for you both. So thank you, and to Ed, who took the call from me because you were standing in for Alistair, who was on secondment at the time. So thanks for all of the support there. But I guess mostly the bids that opened the conversation with us around their discomfort around the draft bid policy. And they provided, I think, us with an example of collaboration, right? Because they got together across Tāmaki, all these bids got together, and a strong force for our businesses. Like to, in particular, thank the bids in the south, Papakura, Manurewa, Manukau in particular, who presented me with a lot of information that was really helpful and were in the conversations with the larger, much larger bids throughout the city. And just on behalf of Councillor Simpson, who I was working alongside on this, she's unwell today, and she would like to pass on her personal thanks to Newmarket and Parnell Business Associations that helped you, Chair, and her as the Chair, to form your Chairs Rec today. So got there in the end, and really well done on that. Thank you both. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Councillor, and just like to briefly add to that, if I may, and acknowledge yourself, actually, Councillor Dalton, for working really hard on this issue, and it was, as you say, a very fraught issue, so thank you for stepping in for that. You know, in one respect, the purpose of a consultation is to go to the community and say, what do you think about this? And then we listen to them, and then we change our proposal according to what they want us to change it to. And in that respect, I think, although it was a very difficult process for some of the players involved, I think at the same time it's an example of local democracy in action. So that's a good thing. It is also a good thing to hear today during the discussion that bids like Te Aratu, the smaller ones, that are being worked through because they may be under the threshold despite functioning, in my opinion, very well, working with them rather than against them, frankly, and doing a great job in that way. Acknowledging as well, I'd like to also acknowledge Newmarket, Parnell and Takapuna and the other bids that worked really hard on this issue to knock together something that actually seems to be working very well for the council side and the bid side. That's a great thing because the bid program shouldn't be taken for granted. I think it's a very important part of building a city, town centres within suburbs and areas like that. That can really improve people's lives. The bid have a huge role to play in that, and I like to think that we're passing this one today to really strengthen that partnership. So it's a good day. I don't have any other people waiting to speak here. So the motion is on screen, and just again alerting you to the Chairs Rec there to tidy up the mediation section a little bit. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Pippa. Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Thank you. We're almost there, councillors. Item 11, insurance update, and just at the end we will have another item on this, so don't run away. But this is for the open section, item 11, page 139 on your agenda. John, nice to see you again. Feel free to take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I noticed there's a paper also under the confidential section. So I propose really holding any discussion and questions until then. So look, I'll take this paper as read.
I think that is wise. No comments or questions? Cool. I'll ask for a mover and a seconder. Mayor Goff will move. Councillor Young will second. All those in favour say aye.
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 Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, and we'll see you shortly. You may as well stay there. Item 12, Summary of Finance and Performance Committee Information, Memoranda and Briefings. It's an information-only report, so I'll just put it straight on there. Councillor Coombe will move. Councillor Dalton will second. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Item 13, same again, summary of confidential decisions and related information released into the open, another information only report. With this meeting's permission, I will ask for a mover and a seconder. Thanks, Councillor Young. I'll second, throw it in there. Okay, usually there's no discussion on information only report. No, cool. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. We're good? We're good. Item 14, there are no items of extraordinary business. I will move a motion on item 15 to exclude the public for our confidential item. Can I have a second?
Second, Cooper.
Thank you,
Cooper.
Linda. Thank you. Online, Linda Cooper, seconding the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. We'll have to wait 5 minutes to clear the room. There's no one in the room.
Rejoin the technology in the room.
Yes, we have to rejoin the tech in the room. There'll be another,
There's another link, so if members can pop onto the other link, the confidential.
Cool. Thank you, Sandra. So there's another link here, the confidential invite for those of you online. So we'll give you 5 minutes to pop out of this one and to join that one. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in 5.